In 2004, the European Union was joined by 10 new countries, among others plenty of the former post-communist ones, including Poland, Czechia, Slovakia and Hungary. Former East Germany was already part of the Union due to its reunification with the West already in 1990. As part of the former Eastern Bloc, this region fell behind in economy, technology and very obviously in infrastructure projects. The EU tries to level out these areas across the entire Union. How much money the EU actually gives away for this purpose, what projects are supported and how, well, let's take a look at that today, while in our virtual city of Altengrad, I will be using this new sweet EU money to build the first part of the city's highway ring. Let's go. There are a lot of European programs and funds that countries, but even individual institutions can apply for to finance their project, if it falls into the wanted categories that the EU wants to develop. So money is not just handed over, but a specific project needs to be delivered. The funds and programs names directly give away the EU's strategy, basically the entire point of this support. We have, for example, the Cohesion Fund, aimed to, quote, reduce economic and social disparities and to promote sustainable development, end quote, various agricultural funds, education and research programs, or, for example, transportation projects. So the EU tries to be cohesive, wants to be wealthy equally everywhere, wants to have good education, research, healthcare, defense. You know, nothing all that surprising. Practically every project or activity that improves something inside the EU could very well fit into some program for funding. So how does this work in practice? Let's say a state wants to build a new highway. First, if the state wants to have the project partially financed by the EU, it needs to time the beginning of the project until the European Commission opens a call for proposals in some program. So the Commission announces something like, we reserved, 1 billion euros for infrastructure, focusing on highways, railways, or maybe airports, or maybe electric vehicle recharge stations, whatever, something like that. And if the investor fits into that call, then they can apply. They write a proposal, all the proposals are then collected, it's determined if they meet the requirements, and if they do, they get the money. A funding deal is signed, EU transfers the money, and the investor is legally obligated to finish the project and fulfill all points of the deal, meaning deliver exactly the kind of project result they described, deliver it in the time they agreed, and not divert the money elsewhere, of course. All of this is closely watched. There are many stories from all kinds of private and state administration workers where companies complained about the ridiculous amount of paperwork, of control, and how it's very easy to get into trouble and be fined for just not filling some documents right. In some cases, the funding has to be returned completely, which is a serious problem, of course. So especially in the early days of the EU funds coming into the newly accepted countries, there were only a handful of people who knew how to handle the entire process correctly. So people who knew how to navigate the EU money waters were practically superstars. There were, for example, adverts for consultation services on how to correctly get EU funding. Well, there still are. In Czechia, for example, there were and still are problems with actually not being able to get all the reserved funding because people simply don't apply for it right or at all. But the state's administrations largely learned the process already, and a vast majority of structures built by the state that can be funded by the EU are. Let's now finally take a look at some numbers that I collected here. I mostly want to show you this because EU funding is just something that is mentioned in all sorts of debates very frequently, both positively and negatively, but rarely with any basic context. What do those numbers actually mean in the grand scheme of things? The funding is just something that is happening, that's it. So, first of all, this is the chart of the whole revenue or money collected of the European Union from 2004. Obviously, the EU existed before that, but 2004 is when our post-communist countries entered. The contribution part is the money directly sent to the EU from its member countries, basically a membership fee. The rest is then sort of direct revenue of the entire EU, apparently some customs fees, outside payments, surplus from the previous years, and many more. It's actually not a lot of money. Some 250 billion euros in 2022. Let me explain why I think it's actually not a lot. For example, Poland alone had in 2022 some 117 billion euros government revenue. German Federation revenue was 526 billion, and adding to it the German regional and local government revenue plus social security revenue, it's close to 1.7 trillion euros. I think that this is quite an important thing to realize, that the EU as an institution isn't actually handling that much money compared to the individual countries, especially the bigger and richer ones. This is a big difference compared to, for example, the United States, where the federal revenue in 2022 was some $5 trillion. California alone spent some 440 billion, only quotation marks, so not even close to the federal revenue or federal spending. Obviously, the European Union is not a federation of its states like the USA, but it's just interesting to see how very far from it is when it comes to money. A vast majority of the EU's revenue in 2023, some 85%, was used back to fund the projects in individual countries through the funds and programs. Only the remaining 15% was spent on some common general EU matters, which is logical since the independent member countries mostly do their own thing. This map shows which regions receive more attention in EU funding overall. Notice how it's not countries, but regions, really. It is basically a map of richer and poorer regions where the EU funding aims to decrease these differences. It doesn't mean that projects from the rich regions cannot get EU funding, but they cannot apply for certain calls. For example, companies from the rich regions cannot ask for EU grants to buy new technology for retaining jobs or something. But there are many, many more, and it's complicated. Basically, what this map also shows are regions and practically countries that are net receivers and net givers. Each country pays its contribution, but some countries get back more than they paid. So together with some regions of Southern Europe, that's the entire post-communist center and east. This chart shows how much money was received around here minus the contributions. The money for funding projects are all over the place, as you can see, because of exactly the fact that it's tied to the projects. If there were no projects to be funded or specific calls were not open, less money was transferred. Simple as that. Let's switch this to relative to the population, which brings the lines very close together, showing that it's actually Hungary that gets quite a lot of EU money for its population, but overall the lines are very similar, only highlighting that the strategy for funding is more or less the same between the countries. What exactly the EU finances in these countries? Let's break it down in Poland for 2022, right here. These are the most important funds, but as you can see, the other category is around 1.2 billion euros. So that's many, many more individual funds combined. The highest is the ERDF, Regional Development. Well, this one covers basically everything. The priorities for it until 2027 are so the regions become more, quote, competitive, smarter, greener, connected, social, and closer to citizens, end quote. So it literally covers everything, from infrastructure to, solar panels. Cohesion Fund is, well, actually quite similar. This one is specifically done only for the poorer countries and aims to, quote, strengthen the economic, social, and territorial cohesion of the EU, end quote, which can mean just about anything. Again, this fund is apparently responsible for financing some of the trans-European railway networks. Then there are the agricultural funds. Those are finally more straightforward. Those are basically farmers' subsidies. The social fund deals with things like equal opportunities in the labor market, improving education, and overall projects improving the workforce in the region. In the recent years, there is also the Next Gen EU, which is a program done as a sort of post-COVID restart boost in healthcare, education, small businesses, and finally the Connecting Europe Facility Transport Fund. It's a pretty straightforward one. it funds the projects that connect Europe. It has 3 sub-programs. By the way, all of these programs have some sub-programs, but this one has energy, that is for electricity networks, pretty obvious. Then transport, railways, roads, but also air and water transport, which is very relevant for Poland, for example. And the third is called digital, which is just making all of this fit the 21st century. Let's move on to another little piece of context that I wanted to include. Sometimes you hear in all sorts of discussions the actual role of EU funds in the receiver countries. How much difference are the funds making? Is the European Union actually building those countries from the ground up? Or are the amounts received just drops in an ocean, not really making a difference? I took the time to collect government revenue data for the Czech Republic each year and see how much of it are EU funds. Now, the funds don't actually go into the country's budgets, but rather directly into the funded projects, some in the private sector. So this is not quite an accurate comparison. But still, yeah, the EU money does play a major role. Economies of the other countries in the region are roughly similar relative to the population, so this revenue percentage would be quite similar in them as well. Is this extra EU money always spent wisely on essential projects that noticeably improve the countries? No. One example for all, the Hungarian canopy walkway, which apparently cost the EU some 160,000 euros, in the Hungarian Rural Development Program, yet another one. It's not quite going through any canopies of trees, because all trees were cut down just before the walkway was built, but even then it looks, plenty of such projects, unfortunately, some slightly better than others. Well, anyways, since I'm building the city's highway ring, let's also update the evolution map of motorway networks in Central Europe for the 2000s. The EU funds did not play that major role in road building just yet, because the countries only entered the EU in 2004, and as we saw in the charts, they did not get that much money initially. Still, quite a lot of new kilometers were officially added to the network. Former East Germany, of course, is something totally else due to the reunification. The domestic programs and politics played a much greater role in funding. When it comes to the highway rings that I'm building down here in the city, those are, for example, started or continued to be built in Budapest, around Budapest, and Prague. Now let's talk about what I'm building down here. Well, highways. As you can see, of course, I'm building the highway ring around the city. It's quite a big project. It's certainly unusual for the city or for me to build these many interchanges in one go. I did not build 1 or 2, but actually 5 in total. Sure, some of them are not exactly super complicated, but still, 5 is quite a lot. Well, anyways, right now in the time-lapse, I am in probably the most difficult area to build or to change, which is the harbor. And over here, we are extending the highway that originates in the city tunnel. It was unfinished. I mean, the tunnel was finished, but it was just going into the interchange that we built in the 80s, if I'm not mistaken. And it was just ending, aiming towards the harbor, but ending. And now we are finally completing that. So that's exactly this extension. It's going on the side of the harbor, on the side of the railway track that just goes from the harbor and connects to the main line. And this highway then goes between the houses, between the built areas. To be completely honest, I did already prepare for this highway project back when I was building everything around here. So, the space that we have left for the highway is not exactly a coincidence. So yeah, that was planned a very long time ago, a couple of years ago. So this highway goes under this railway track, this main line, then it goes under the main connecting road that goes into the harbor, town, village, and then eventually it just reaches the big interchange that I started this project with in the time-lapse and that you're going to see in the cinematics, of course, in the end. So this one had to be very compact because I don't have a lot of space. I eventually decided for a roundabout interchange, so a simple roundabout down in the middle, down here. Well, yeah, I'm building it just now, and it just connects the 4 ramps into the highway, the entrances and exits. Now, there is this railway, this cargo railway that cuts right through the roundabout. I suppose that's fine. It's not really heavily used railway. I suppose that in the 2000s right now it's not used at all, but it was there. The companies or some kind of administration, maybe even the city, did not really want to demolish it, so it just cuts through the roundabout. If there ever was a train going through here, it would obviously go at a snail's pace, and workers would just, temporarily stop traffic for it, but I don't suppose that these railways are ever used anymore. So I had to demolish a couple of warehouses for the highway, but nothing all that crazy. But we had to do some extensive terrain modifications, so that's why I'm using these retaining walls, for example, over here. It's overall quite a nice interchange, quite a compact interchange. It took me probably the longest to put together because I had to really fiddle with some of the connections to just make them right. And eventually it turned out looking pretty okay. With these interchanges, with this one and the big one, I'm using different technique, a new technique that I've never used before actually, for creating the ramps or like connections to the main highway and the ramps. And that is, I'm using the nodeless version of these roads, and then I'm basically making these as if they were back in the day. There was this pack of highways, the CSUR, something like that, which used the nodeless connections. So I tried something similar over here. It is doable on bridges and very flat terrain, completely flat terrain, but it's a headache to do it on sloped terrain. So that's exactly that cloverleaf interchange, the big one, the first one that I built. So that was a lot of work actually to put that together, and I'm not going to use that technique again. The benefit of that technique is that the off-ramps are so smooth. They are like perfectly, like geometrically perfect. And I can also do very nice markings in there. So the markings that I'm using, sometimes, you will see that in the cinematic, sometimes they are there, sometimes they're not. So when they are there, it's those like 3 stripes, then a pause and another 3 stripes, pause, stripes, and they are continuing into the segments, right? That's the biggest advantage of that. I've seen that in real life. I've used it in Altengrad some time before, so I really like to use that one. Unfortunately, it requires manual placement. It's a bit of a lot of work. You cannot really do that with intersection marking tools. So yeah, it's a lot of work, and I'm just not having the patience with this project because 5 interchanges in total. So somewhere I used it, somewhere I didn't. Where I didn't, you will see I'm just using the normal chevrons with intersection marking tools. Right, so in the time lapse, I finally moved to the last interchange, I believe, which is also the end of the highway ring for now. It is entering a tunnel, but the tunnel is not built. It's just the portals. Obviously, in real life, the portals would not be there. The highway would just end by this interchange, and that's it. But I really needed to know where the tunnel entrance is going to be so that I can do already the detailing. Again, the detailing up to the tunnel entrance would not be there in real life, but if I'm doing the highway or the interchange project right now, might as well do it complete. I really don't want to, go back to it in some time and just figure out how I wanted to build it back then. So I'm a bit more consistent with that. So yeah, the tunnel is where it's going to end until the next decade for sure. Even though I'm not really sure how many episodes I would like to dedicate to the highway ring still. Well, definitely at least 2, because, even though I built 5 interchanges and quite a big stretch of the highway ring, it's still maybe like 1/4 of it around the entire city. So, a lot of work still ahead of us. So I'll definitely have to split it between a couple of episodes. There's going to be a huge tunnel at this tunnel portal. We have to just cut across like a huge hill and just emerge on the other side of it, on the other side of the the 1950s district, basically. You will see that in the cinematics where we are, and then do some other exits, connections to other highways. So, a lot of work. Now, in this one in particular, by the way, I always say this, but I don't really want to do like big highway interchanges where I don't need them. So for these exits, I'm heavily using the partial cloverleaf designs and just doing the intersections, doing some multiple lanes for different turns, and then just something very simple for markings. Sometimes I'm blocking some lanes just to have it a little more interesting, really. It's not the most efficient use of roads, really, gameplay-wise, for sure, but it's just something different. I really want to build different interchanges every time. So this one, for example, has that roundabout. It's slightly different geometrically, so it's just something different, right? In real life, obviously, they would just build it more or less the same if they could, but in the game, I just want to have it, spicier and not that boring to build, actually, for me. Well, anyways, now we have the cinematics, and the way I put together the cinematics this time is we are starting at the bridge over the river, the one where I just built a construction site in the 90s, and I'm just going to go across the entire length of this new highway segment so that you can see, the progression of it, I suppose. So the first interchange is that it's just a simple highway exit, partial cloverleaf, the asymmetrical one, I suppose, that just connects to some sort of a smaller road that goes into the city, into the harbor town. Next is this huge cut in the terrain and the cloverleaf interchange. Now, this is the different highway that, like I said, originates at the city tunnel, goes through the city harbor between the built areas, and eventually reaches that cloverleaf interchange. Well, it's not a cloverleaf interchange, is it? At least not like the full one. It only has the 3 clovers and like a stack part or something. Again, I just did that because I did not really want to build a complete cloverleaf. Cloverleafs are boring. By the way, in City Skylines, cloverleaf interchanges are probably the worst interchanges you can build, actually, because they don't really work. You are obviously merging the traffic that enters the highway and then exits the highway as well. So doing that stack part, the flyover, helps with that. It's done in real life, by the way, as well. For this particular interchange, I actually took some inspiration from Bratislava. There is one like that near the border with Austria, even though these kinds of flyover changes for interchanges are quite common. Actually, in real life, you might sometimes see that there is a cloverleaf interchange, a full one with 4 clovers. And then sometime in the 2010s, 2020s, they actually get rid of one of those clovers and build the flyover because they decided that, hey, traffic is a bit too heavy in that particular turn. But yeah, City Skylines cloverleafs don't exactly work. I don't really want to use them, but they are realistic. At this point in time in real life, they were built quite a lot, especially in Hungary. If you look at the Hungarian highway ring around Budapest, then there are so many cloverleaf interchanges, but even around Bratislava, like I said, and some other places of the world, of course. So anyways, that is going to be it for this highway ring project, or at least a very small part of it, actually. So we are going to see it in some other episodes. But next time, we are going to return to the city center and do some changes there. Guys, thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, then you know the drill to do below the video. All the clicking, writing, subscribing, sharing. Thank you so much, all the channel members who directly support me and what I'm doing in here with this channel. Thank you guys so much. I will see you next time. Take care. Goodbye.